Leslie, welcome back to the Strong Female Athlete podcast.
I am so excited to be here today. It's going to take that dive into the necessary, right? What do female athletes need to think about in their fuel kit? Not just everything you bring with you to practice and competition, but the other stuff you do so that you can be your best when you're on the field.
I always love your perspective because you include the female athletes and the parents in the conversation. And I think the topic we're going to talk about today, as far as nutrient deficiencies specific to female athletes and kind of how to solve those or to know if you even have a deficiency, this is going to be so critical for parents and even the coaches listening to just be informed about this to help our female athletes be healthy and perform at a high level. So let's get right into it. My first question is just universally, what deficiencies do you see are the most common in female athletes?
We'll start with what we would say are the macronutrients. In other words, kind of the big pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, of what's on the plate. So, as much as protein is kind of going around as a buzzword, and people need protein, they do, but not all female athletes get their needs met for protein in terms of the quality of that protein, in terms of the way they eat it over the course of the day. Female athletes tend to be a little bit more prone to being plant-based. Plants are important, they are. But if we get too restrictive, then we run the risk of the unintended consequences. I'm not having enough of. So we can dive into that a little bit more. Second, not enough fat. And I think, unfortunately, that kind of goes with the body image thing. Oh, if I eat fat, then I'll store fat. That's not the way the body works. However, it's out there as this message that fat is bad and you draw an X through it and everything you eat should have no fat whatsoever. Blah. And then that's a problem because we run the risk of deficiency, not only in terms of not having enough fat and the impact that that can have on hormones, but also when we don't consume enough fat, we don't always have enough energy and we don't absorb the fat soluble vitamins, which can be another source of deficiency. So it's kind of a double whammy. And unfortunately, sometimes even with the carbs, and again, because it gets this bad reputation, a bagel, oh my God, I can't possibly do that. Or let's have cauliflower rice. Well, why can't we have cauliflower and rice? We don't necessarily have to swap out one for the other. Again, it's kind of this misguided assumption that carbs will translate to more of my body. It could. But the reality is that when you are running up and down a field, or you are running for miles, or you're biking, or whatever it is you're doing physically, the fact of the matter is that is the fuel to fuel your body. And if you're not having enough of it, then your body has to take from someplace else. It's like going to the ATM too many times and you get that message, sorry, you're done. So we don't want that to be the case. Then when we look at that's the micros of what tends to be more deficient in female athletes, not enough calcium. And sometimes that is because young women decide no dairy for whatever reason, or we live in a house where nobody else is consuming dairy. Being allergic to it, yes, a reason not to have it. Being intolerant to it doesn't mean you can't have it. It means you be selective about the ones that you do. But it gets very difficult to get those needs met for calcium when you are eliminating the dairy food. Vitamin D can be another one that tend to be deficient in. Even if we live in a place where the sun shines, it doesn't always mean we're going to have optimal vitamin D level. Iron, a big one for female athletes. Difference primarily is that female athletes menstruate. Men don't do that. And so there is iron loss that occurs, not only monthly loss, but also when we sweat, we lose iron. When we have foot strikes against the ground, we break down the blood vessels. We lose a little bit of iron. And if we're not consuming foods that are high in iron, then there's a deficit. We also can see deficits in terms of magnesium. It's not in a whole ton of foods. Then if I have young women that say, well, I'm not going to eat grains. Well, that's a big source of magnesium. Oh, I won't eat chocolate because it's terrible. It's Valentine's Day coming up, for heaven's sake. What are you going to do? Give somebody kale? I don't think so. And so when we don't consume those things, then we run the risk of deficiency. And zinc is the other one that sometimes we don't consume enough of, A, because we're not consuming animal source foods, or we're not consuming grains. So that's a lot that really want to take a deep dive in and say, how can we correct that? Because running around in deficiency at some point sooner than later yes, it affects health, it affects performance. So we really want to try and address it on the front end and be proactive. Right? It's like if we're on a soccer field and say we don't do something right, then we work on the skill to get better at it. It just doesn't happen without trying. Same thing here with eating. You have to practice. You have to make the changes in order to correct a deficiency to be able to bring your best to the field each and every day.
So maybe let's dive into some of these micronutrients and the role they play in health and performance. So maybe let's talk about calcium and vitamin D first, and then we can go through the other ones.
Absolutely. So one of the primary functions of calcium and vitamin D together is a kind of the one-two punch for bone health. Now there are some other things involved at that in that as well, but they're really important. Plus protein, kind of that the big triad there for bone health. We know that calcium is also important for nerve impulses. For making our muscles relax and contract, we have to have enough calcium as well. Calcium also has a role to play in terms of regulating blood pressure, but I think most importantly for our young athletes, this is about supporting your supporting structure. That is why we have to have enough. And quite frankly, as a young female athlete, bodies aren't done. They're not cooked yet. They're not finished. And so this is optimal time for a growing healthy bone. It's not at the age of 30, it's as a tween and a teen. And that's why it is so critically important to have enough. So, depending upon what somebody chooses to eat, I'm not going to eat anything with a face or anything that comes out of anything with a face. It gets to be a little bit of a challenge to get those needs met.
Okay, let's go on to iron. This is a big one for females
It
specifically.
is a big one for female athletes. Iron certainly has a role to play in bone health, which a lot of people don't realize. If you don't have enough iron, you're going to have weaker bones. But it also is critically important because when we think about iron and hemoglobin, so hemoglobin is the molecule that carries oxygen to the cell. So if you have iron deficiency, not even anemia, deficiency, then we tend to feel more fatigued, just kind of like somebody took the balloon and the needle in and you're done and you can't do anything. So your ability to perform at the max, your ability to function in the classroom, I can't think because my body is so fatigued. It's just every day it feels like we are slogging through instead of giving it our all. And working with a lot of female athletes, it's always about the how good can I be, not how bad do I feel. Not what we really want to have is how bad do I feel. And that's why iron is so critically important. That being said, getting in enough can be a challenge. Even for young women who are meat eaters, don't always get enough in. But there's some recent studies that have looked at uh, individuals that tend to take all the animal source foods out with like a 40% risk of iron deficiency. Well, that's a big deal. So, can we get the need met through food? Yes, maybe. But might we need to have a supplement? Yes, we might. And most importantly, how do we know? You can't tell by looking at yourself. Oh, I must be down in iron. You don't know that. It's blood work, and nobody likes to do that. But I'm all about data. We don't really want to start doing other things until we know where it is that we stand. So we can be somewhat proactive by the foods that we choose. But if indeed it's kind of this continued, I just don't feel great. I don't feel like myself. I'm feeling fatigued because it can happen pretty subtly over a period of time. Then it's important to have blood work done and actually see where we are and make the changes. And that being said, those changes don't happen overnight. I took one iron pill. I should be feeling great. It's like, that deficit takes a while to occur. And by the same token, it takes a while to correct itself.
Now, what role does vitamin C play in iron being absorbed? Is there something to
It
that?
does. So one of the things about iron, and we look at iron from food sources, there are two. One is the heme iron, and that is the iron that comes from animal sourced food. It is within the muscle of the animal, and some iron source foods are higher than others. So the dark meat of poultry, red meat tend to be higher in iron. Actually, egg yolks have some iron in them as well, and that's the heme iron. The non-heme iron is the iron that comes from plant sourced foods, and it is not absorbed as well as the heme iron. And so when we look at increasing the absorption, it doesn't mean you can't get iron from things that come from a plant. It means that if we want to absorb it maximally, we have things with vitamin C at the same time. And so, for instance, okay, I'm doing something like a bowl of cereal that has iron added. Well, cereal isn't made with beef, or it isn't. So when we're looking at doing like a flake type of cereal that has iron in it, we can see that on the label, and we might have a glass of orange juice, or we choose to put some fruit on the cereal. That's a way of increasing that absorption. Or, well, maybe I'll do a vegetarian chili because I don't want to use meat. Fine. We get a little bit of iron in the beans, and maybe we're adding some tomatoes to bring that vitamin C in to help the body to absorb it better.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Now, the last two, magnesium and zinc, we'll just do together.
Yeah, and so zinc is really important for supporting a healthy immune system. And at this time of the year, when you look to your right and look to your left, and people are coughing and hacking and all kinds of horrible things going on, we want to do the best we can to support a healthy immune system. And zinc definitely has a role to play there. And when we look at magnesium, magnesium is important for nerve health, and it also has a role to play in terms of heart health and bone health. But they're what we call trace minerals. So we don't have those in as large a quantity, for instance, as we might calcium, but they're still essential. And so, it's not that people think, oh, I have a magnesium deficiency. We don't always know. We know that magnesium as well may help us to sleep. People that have problems sleeping, magnesium glycinate is a form of magnesium that may indeed help us to sleep better, which is critically important to help the body restore. It is in foods, but if people start being very selective, okay, I'm not going to have any grains, I'm not going to eat any nuts or seeds or all these things that we take out of our diet, it isn't just that we take out macronutrients, we take out the micronutrients as well. And we have to find a way to replace those back.
Now, you did already list some foods that contain all of these micronutrients. So, are there any other ones female athletes should really focus on to get all these nutrients before we talk
Yeah.
about supplements?
Right, right, right. So, so let's start with calcium. So, the biggest source of calcium is going to be dairy foods. Now, that being said, certain are higher than others. Ice cream, not so much, unfortunately. But when we look at things like milk and cottage cheese and ricotta cheese and yogurt and cheese themselves, yes, they have a very significant amount of calcium in it. But in addition to that, tofu that is typically made with calcium added to make it into the block or the form that it is. That can be a very, very good source of calcium. We also get calcium in almonds. They do have calcium in them. Sesame seeds have calcium in them. And there are cereals that have calcium added. And then even some things that we call calcium fortified. For instance, orange juice that has calcium added. Even though it wasn't in the orange juice to begin with, the fact that it's added, it is still very, very well absorbed. We know that things like a tortilla, so not necessarily a tortilla chip, but like a corn tortilla, it has calcium added to it in the making of it. So even if somebody says, I'm not consuming a dairy product, but I did a tortilla that I might put some refried beans on, you're getting some calcium there. But we need calcium in large amounts. And for young women, 1,300 milligrams a day. That's not a tiny amount. And that really means paying attention to the choices so that we are really working on getting those needs met consistently over the day.
And vitamin D is also a big one, and it is hard to find, like, non-dairy foods that have it, but is salmon a good source of vitamin D?
Salmon has a little bit of vitamin D in it,
Okay.
but the plant-based milks have vitamin D added to them. And again, we could even consume vitamin D in foods regularly and may not always get the needs met simply because the amount that's added is relatively low. Looking at needs for vitamin D, probably at least 1,000 international units a day. So even if vitamin D is added to a milk, it's like 100 IUs. Well, most people don't drink 10 glasses of milk a day. They simply don't. So if somebody has a vitamin D deficiency, then most likely they're going to be looking at some kind of supplementation as a way of bringing those levels up to normal. It just gets unwieldy with volume of food. 10 eggs a day. No, no. who's going to do that? That just maybe some people will, but primarily not the audience that I work with every single day, and not every day of the week. It gets to be a little cumbersome after a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually seen that, here in Florida. I have friends who they got their vitamin D levels checked, and even with the sun and eating eggs, like, they still had a deficiency, and they were very shocked, but all they needed is to really just add a supplement. So don't think living in the sun or on the beach is going to solve all your problems here.
And it doesn't, because certainly if people are being safe about their sun exposure, then what do we normally do? We put on some type of a sunscreen, and then, that's it. You're not really getting the impact of the sun in terms of being able to convert the passive vitamin D that is within the body to an active form. So, we don't want people to have horrible sun exposure either. I mean, that's not really an option. And, it doesn't mean that everybody should, I'm going to start with a vitamin D supplement, but it does mean that it is very, very difficult to get those needs met through food alone. There are some lucky people out there that have vitamin D levels that are great, but more people don't. And I mean, that's a relatively new finding overall, is uncovering and discovering the number of people who indeed might be in a D deficit.
Now, I want to backtrack to fats before we move on to supplements because you nailed it on this one. There are a lot of female athletes that just really fear fats. And I think they're just kind of putting all the fats into the same camp, like a brownie into the same camp as like a salmon or nuts and seeds, which yes, have both strategically, but why can't like salmon and nuts and seeds like make you fat? I guess that's kind of the misconception.
And I think, first of all, it's just the way that we describe them: fat, oh my God. It's
Yeah.
fat. So I'm going to eat that fat because then I will be fat. And that isn't what happens in the body. I mean, truly, if I figured out, and I wouldn't want to do this in a in a real setting, but just to say that if I had a young woman I was working with and said, all right, we're going to do this horrible experiment, and I'm going to figure out what you need calorically, and the only thing I'm going to give you is a diet of 100% fat. How nauseating that would be. It would be, but it would be fine, because we just kind of assume that fat does something entirely different than any other nutrient. And that simply isn't true. We need it. It is essential for females and female athletes to have enough fat, because it is part of insulation for the body, insulation around the organs of the body. It is bone protective to have fat. It is a critical component of sex hormone. So when we're not consuming enough fat, everything really tends to go awry. And I have had this happen in many of my female athletes, and all of a sudden I've noticed, it's like, their hair, it's like it's dreadful. They just are cold all the time. It's like all of these things that happen because we're so afraid of eating this food item. And let alone the enjoyment of it. Fat brings the aroma and the flavor to what it is that we eat. It's part of the mouth feel. We actually end up feeling fuller for longer by including some fat rather than excluding it. And I find probably 100% of the time is those that are too fat restrictive, they feel like they're eating a mouse. Every hour you need to eat something because the body's saying, please just give me some peanut butter. Just give me something that has some fat in it.
Yeah. So, yeah, peanut butter, we talk about like nuts, seeds, fish, anything else that's a great fat
Even
source
thinking
to
about a dairy food is,
Mhm.
again, it doesn't have to be skim milk. It could, but it doesn't have to be. It
Oh,
can be.
skim milk does not taste good though.
No, right, and I
It
mean, if
tastes like
people know about
water.
drinking coffee, it's like, "What is that? My coffee's great, it's so unappealing." Every other country of the world uses full-fat yogurt, uses real cheese, uses whole milk, and, "Oh my god, it's whole milk," but, it's not a big difference calorically, it still brings the protein, and we better absorb the fat-soluble vitamins because they're fat soluble, so they kinda need the fat in order for our body to absorb them. And I think so often when people are willing to add fat in, it's like, "Oh my god, I wasn't hungry all the time. Oh my god, I actually feel more satisfied. Oh my god, food tastes good," instead of, "What was that?" It's supposed to be an enjoyable experience, not a torture when we eat.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so true. You just feel more satiated and you look forward to what you're eating. And I grew up on this whole reduced fat nonsense. Like we had skim milk and I didn't like it. It was watery, it was thin, it just wasn't filling. And then now I'm like I go to Starbucks, I'm like, "Give me the whole milk." And all these other people are ordering the skinny latte and I'm like, "Well, I get to enjoy my calories, be full, absorb vitamin D, like you said." And it's just amazing. And I encourage female athletes to just break out of that fat is scary cycle.
And I think also for female athletes is you're thinking about the role models and even role models of successful soccer players that live in other countries of the world. They don't eat a diet that is minimal fat. And typically when we're looking in Italy, in Spain, in France, they're eating 36% of their calories every day from fat. It's not zero. So, if I really want to be like my role model, it's not just what they wear, it's not just what it is they do on the field, it's this hand to mouth activity as well. It truly is a necessary component of optimizing our health in order to optimize our performance.
Yeah, I love that. And just really following the right athlete role models and not these like model influencers that don't play sports. They're totally different than female athletes. And you preach this a lot. And it's just really sad what a lot of these girls are being blasted with what some of these models are eating.
Well, I mean, this is it. If somebody's sitting all day long or the most they do is strike a pose, that's not a tremendous amount of energy expended when, I'm a defender, I'm striker, I'm sweeper. I'm doing all these types of things, and it is a lot of energy expenditure. It's also mental energy expenditure. And if the body is at a deficit, how can we think clearly? How can we react clearly? How can we recover well to do it again? Think about tournaments. Think about preseason, where oftentimes you're on the field more than once a day. You have got to put in what your body needs. There's no makeup. You can't do it after the fact because we already then have had a missed opportunity.
Mhm. Now, let's move on to when to supplement. So, you mentioned that female athletes, if they really want to know if there's a deficiency, they should get blood work. So, I have two questions to this. So, at what age, because I don't know if a mom wants to take their 10-year-old to get blood work. So, at what age is appropriate for adolescent female athletes to kind of look into this with blood work? And then my second question is what panels should they be ordering?
And so, I mean, we're looking at this is when we're probably looking at when somebody become when a young woman becomes a teenager. I mean, that kind of being an appropriate time if indeed there is concern that there may be some degree of deficiency. Now, we're not talking about somebody who might have an underlying deficiency. Maybe they have malabsorption. It happens sometimes. That's different because they're having blood work done regularly, anyways, to monitor what's going on. But I think more importantly than that is, as female athlete and parents, is we have to be involved in what it is that your kids consume. And we're kind of looking and say, well, no, I mean, I don't really want to eat anything with the face, or I'm not going to do dairy anymore. I mean, I don't really want to have breads or whatever. That should be a little red flag going off in your head to say, okay, well, then maybe we need to see where we are right now and figure out what we need to do. That being said, parents, a supplement is not a replacement for a meal. It is not. It is a complement to what's happening with food because the supplements don't have calories in it. It's always a critical point to remember that, okay, well, I had an iron deficiency. So, yeah, I'll just take an iron supplement. But if we're not getting the needs met in terms of the food, that's not really helping anything. It causes very expensive urine. But I do think that that would be something to look at. But I think as well is even kind of thinking about, for our athletes and for their parents is, what do I choose to eat daily? And what do I choose not to eat daily? Well, I'm choosing to be plant-based. Right? That doesn't mean you're going to be deficient, but it means the risk can be a little bit higher because of what's not on the plate. Or, well, I'm choosing not to have anything that comes from a cow or a sheep or a goat. Well, then it gets a little harder to get the calcium needs met. So, those types of things, that's the checklist we do first before we might run right into supplement. And, there are also options. I mean, that's the nice thing is there are non-dairy calcium options. So we go to that. We definitely want to do that to help to get those needs met. And then we might decide to supplement on top of that if we need to. And truly with supplementation, I'll just say this, that there's lots of options that are out there. More is not better. That's not I'm not always looking for the highest level of something to take. It's in general, I look at the purpose of a multivitamin mineral supplement as just kind of rounding out the edges. I mean, that's really what it does. So if a young woman is taking a multivitamin mineral, what's going to be in there? All of the vitamins plus the minerals. There will be some iron. There will be calcium. There will be magnesium. There will be zinc. So it's not okay. I don't need lunch. I just took my one a day. No, but it means, all right, I took that. So I can breathe a little bit easier, that I know that I'm putting things into my body consistently daily. And that's the way supplements are designed to be used. Not once a week, not once a month. It's every single day.
And what panels should they order? So obviously vitamin D and then a metabolic, anything else to look at?
And that's really it. I mean, the other thing that we might do, because it's not always done routinely, if there is concern about iron, it isn't just doing hemoglobin hematocrit, it's also doing transferrin and ferritin, and sometimes that's just a little bit more involved panel. But again, we're trying to discover where the problems are, and most of us don't love having blood work done, so we just kind of like one and done. We don't want to have to go back and do more. So it's like, fine, take it. Take it and let's see what's going on. And then at least we know rather than guessing or rather than supplementing inappropriately. Well, I know I must be in deficit and I need copious amounts of vitamin. Not necessarily. Everything might be fine, or it might be just a little bit under, and therefore we find the appropriate amount of something to take. This is especially true with iron because iron can be distressing to the GI tract. It just can. And sometimes that becomes the rate limiting step. If I don't want to take it because I have an upset stomach, or I have this terrible taste in my mouth, or I can't go to the bathroom anymore. Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that can happen with certain supplementation, which is why we don't want to leap towards high levels, and we have to make sure we take it appropriately and then do what we need to do around it to prevent that from happening.
Now, when should parents of female athletes consider looking at thyroid or hormonal panels? Like anything we should be concerned about or red flags?
Yeah, and I think certainly when we're thinking about, for instance, if we have a female athlete, young woman who maybe she started her cycle and then it goes away, that would be a reason for concern is what's going on. We want to certainly rule out red zest. We want to see what else is going on at that point. When we're looking at, for instance, all of a sudden this onset, an onslaught of just fatigue, of not feeling well, of noticing hair changes, skin changes, all those types of things. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can happen. And there's other reasons it can happen too, but sometimes it is related to the fact that we have deficiency. And one of the things that is true about the human body, we are remarkably resilient. It takes a lot of abuse until we see those levels lowering. That doesn't mean that somebody's healthy, even if they might already be experiencing some of those other things. But this is why parents need to be aware. We don't have to helicopter, but we still need to be in the same room. We need to know what is going on because we really are the ones that are the keepers of our kids' health. It just is that way. We are the ones who are doing the food shopping. We are the ones, many of the times, doing the food prepping. We are the ones that are going to take our kids to the PCP if they need to go or for blood work or whatever. So those are the things we have to be a partner in our kids' health. Without a doubt, it is critically important. And then the other thing about it, even from a supplement perspective, is our kids are not little adults. They're not. So the needs are going to be different of what an adolescent requires than what it is that an adult requires. Well, I'll just give my daughter this stuff that I'm taking. No, we don't want to do that. We've got to make sure that it is appropriate.
Yeah, I have a few follow-up questions to that because I get asked a lot about certain supplements like green powders or protein powder. Like, when are those appropriate? Are they ever appropriate for teenage girls? So maybe we can discuss that a little bit.
Well, let's go with the green powder first. Are they
Yes.
appro No. Should they ever be used? No. The reason for this is it seems incredibly easy is, okay, I don't have to have a salad. I could just use the green powder. It's not a one-for-one replacement. When we're actually consuming vegetables, we're getting the fiber, we're getting the fluid, we're getting the carbohydrate, we're even getting a little bit of protein that is in vegetables itself. When you kind of extract that out and just try and dry something, all that goes by the wayside. And you're left with a little bit of this dried material that might have some of the plant nutrient in it, but it's not the same as eating broccoli or having spinach or having kale or whatever. They're extremely pricey. They don't really taste all of that good. And it's like, I would put that. I bet like, no, absolutely no. Yeah, there's always ways that vegetables can be added. And think about this, it's not just in the green category. There's lots of colors of vegetables. There's yellow ones, there's orange ones, there's red ones. So there's eat something like pumpkin added to a smoothie. Yeah, even throwing a little bit of spinach into a smoothie, it doesn't always change the taste if we're starting with something red or blue or even the color. It'll still look like a berry smoothie, but now we've made it a little bit better, and that is so much more nutritious than, oh, I sprinkled these powders in that just really aren't doing anything short of draining our wallet. Uh, when it comes to the protein powders, and here I think the biggest issue is that is not the replacement for. That is a complement to help to amplify protein intake to optimize what it is that we get. That's the reason to use them. So when we think about those types of things, it isn't always necessary for somebody to have a protein shake. And it's always been my big critique of this for young women and even for older women is that the volume is so enormous. Because most women are like, how am I going to get all of that down? I have to use two hands to try and bring it to my mouth. There's no rule that says we have to do that, right? We could use a little scoop of something or a half a scoop of something and embellish upon another food we would eat. So, could I add a little bit of protein isolate to an oatmeal? Of course, I could do that. Could I add a little bit to a peanut butter? Yes, to make that a higher protein peanut butter. That would be a very simple thing to do, or even adding a little bit to a pancake mix. Yeah, there are products out there. Well, we don't have to use the products that have it in. We can do it ourselves. So when I'm looking at protein, I'm looking at isolate number one, not a protein powder, a protein isolate, meaning that the only thing in there is the protein itself. And then, when we're looking at better ones, because the quality is not the same across the board, is I would say my number one pick, unless somebody had a dairy allergy, would be to use a whey protein isolate. So that is one of the proteins coming from milk, and it certainly is a very, very high quality protein. The unflavored one, I tend to like that because then I can use it in a savory or a sweet application. If it has a flavor in it, that's going to be the limiting step. Let's add chocolate protein isolate to a spaghetti sauce. Probably not a good idea. It would be very horrible in terms of the taste. Then I would say soy protein isolate would be the second on my list in terms of what would be a high quality one. They're getting a little harder to find, but they still are out there and also available to order online if we want to, because the quality of a soy protein isolate is comparable to what a whey protein isolate would be. Then we have lots of other choices out there in terms of plant-based ones. They just don't have the same amount of essential amino acids, meaning that you have to use double the amount. Well, now I have to use 2 scoops instead of one. And what is that taste? And what is that grainy consistency? That's the problem. And then everybody flocking to collagen. Poor quality protein. It's not a replacement. Oh, I'll do a smoothie and put some collagen in the morning. Why? Don't do that because it isn't the same. It's very popular right now. People using it from a vanity perspective. There have been some clinical applications when we are looking at post ACL in surgery. But again, that's not across the board. Everybody is not seeing a benefit from it. So if we're really going to choose something, let's be selective about the protein that we choose. Think about an isolate, whey or soy being the best ones to use, and start small and realize, that's one little component of what we do. So you're not going to like, oh, let's just snort it in. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to mix it with something and thinking about less volume because that's a lot more comfortable to consume it that way.
I'm glad you brought up collagen because it's so popular now for hair, skin, and nails. And my thing is, if you think that's going to be the needle mover, yet at the same time, you're not getting enough calories and you're not eating your fats, then the collagen's not really going to help.
It
You're better
really
off
is.
eating those healthy fats for your skin.
Yeah, right, and you're not getting right, there's a lot of what you're not getting, and even I mean, that's also true of a protein isolate. What you're getting, the protein, that's it. You're not getting the vitamins and minerals and fat and other components that would be in the food sources of it. So that's why I said it is not a replacement for, it's I'll add in. I'll add in a little bit to my peanut butter to give me a little bit more protein, but I'm not just using that protein isolate and saying goodbye to every other thing. Plus, the volume of collagen. So, if we're talking 1 scoop of whey protein is what it might require, in order to get a comparable amount of leucine, you're probably looking 6 or 7 scoops of collagen. The smell alone, let alone the taste and everything else. Who is going to do that? What are you going to mix it in to get it down? And the price is absolutely prohibitive for that. Now, that's not to say that there aren't foods that are expensive right now. They are. But when you think about supplements, you're talking about much more in terms of the price of those items. And if we're spending all that money on supplements, we don't always have enough left over for the other things that are a critical component of our plate.
Mhm. Now, the back to the green powders, I think you made such an important point that you need to have the food sources to get more of those vitamins and amazing minerals in them, but also the calories as well, because those green powders are like 0 to 10 calories, maybe, being nice.
Right, no, it's not. I mean, there's no way that we could get through a class or even 2 minutes of practice, let alone anything else. Bodies do not run on empty, right? They don't. Because if we do that, then it forces the body to do something it doesn't want to do. It has to generate that energy from somewhere. And typically, the door number one it goes to is, well, let's break down lean mass because that's a quicker energy generator. That's precisely what we don't want to do. And so this is the probably things look great, they look easy. Oh, let's use some green powders and it's wonderful. But the body's saying, what were you thinking? It's not working for me. And again, the price. So you're paying a lot of money for nothing in terms of the ROI. Is what am I getting out of this? Really not much, if anything.
So before we wrap up, are there any other supplements you want to warn people of that are just kind of fads right now?
Well, there's a lot.
We'll
So
have fun with this one.
all right. So one of them is kind of looking at things like branched chain amino acids. We just need to do that. Well, no, we really need to eat protein because protein is comprised of lots of different amino acids, the building blocks of, and just taking something like a branched chain amino acid supplement. Number one, it has minimal amount of protein and it takes much, much longer for the body to assimilate new protein from a supplement than it does from a food. So that's the first one. Anything that is labeled as a burner, fat burner, it doesn't. The only thing it does is make you pee or poop more. So no, anything that is labeled as kind of this a colon blow for lack of that because they're out there, right? Things like okay, this will clean me out, detox, that kind of stuff. No, because the same problem is what they tend to do is they cause you to pee more and poop more, and then you're dehydrated, and then you usually feel miserable. And this is about what you're taking out of your body instead of putting back in. And then even some of the things that are advertised as immune supporters. There are things that we know, there's a lot of things we don't know, but overdoing on supplementation is not your defense against things you need to do to support a healthy immune system. That's consuming enough protein. That's having fruits and vegetables every day. That's eating foods that might have zinc in them instead of, I'll just take copious amounts of zinc lozenges. It doesn't work. And the reason for that is that when we take huge amounts of certain minerals, it can interfere with the absorption of some of the other ones that are really important for us. And that's why we really don't want to do those things. In general, I always say this: if it sounds too good to be true, it is. I think, oh, if I take this supplement, I'll be a better soccer player. No, you won't. Yeah, if I take this, I'll have prettier hair. No, you won't. Or, I'll automatically lose all of my extra weight. No, you won't. And because we can't replace supplements with food, it just doesn't work that way. So being careful, being informed consumers, everybody that is a soccer player, and having done this with my sons, is they were very selective and particular about the cleats that they chose. It had to fit their foot. If it doesn't fit your foot, then you don't feel good on the field, right? And really the same thing here is we have to be smart, safe, selective, and sure when we think about supplements, and not just more is better or it doesn't matter what I eat. If you don't eat well and you take a lot of supplements, you have a well supplemented crappy diet. There it is. And that is certainly not going to optimize health, nor will it optimize performance.
Yeah, there's so many of those like slogans that are just flashy
Oh,
and sound good, like fat burning or detox or cleanse. And even with the protein powders, a lot of them on the label say fat burning or muscle building or lean muscle. And it's like, well, if you're not eating enough and lifting weights at the same time, you're not really going to get lean muscle from just this protein powder. So,
and if you see something that says fat burning on a protein powder, then most likely there's something else in there that is acting as a diuretic we pee more or a diuretic we poop more. So that is really not going to help build muscle at all. The only thing it does is it makes your body lose fluid, which is vitally important. So, I think it's buyer be cautious, not necessarily be aware, but be cautious. And that might be, when we talk about supplements, are the icing. We have to have the cake underneath. That icing tastes really sweet, and that's the fun and yummy part. But we really need that cake, and the cake comes from the food that we eat.
and do fat burners also have stimulants in them, like caffeine, which teenage girls need to really be careful with?
And a lot of the fat burners do, and say, oh, well, it must be working because I'm on the ceiling. It's like, well, no, it's because you consumed a copious amount of caffeine. And the biggest issue there is how that impacts sleep, right? If I'm wired all of the time, then I'm not going to be able to settle my body down. And sleep is restorative for the body. So it says it burns fat, so that's all it's doing. Take a look at what's in it. Does it have guarana in it? Does it have green coffee extract in it? Does it have uh, uh, other forms of caffeine that could be there in it? And put it back on the shelf. Just don't. I don't think anybody should use a fat burner at all because it doesn't. And the unintended consequences are probably going to be more detrimental overall.
Awesome. Well, Leslie, this was so fun and so brilliant. And I think this is going to be really helpful for the audience. I am going to include all of your links in the caption below so everyone can follow your content, work with you, maybe ask you some questions. But Leslie's awesome. She's super responsive. So definitely reach out if you have questions. And I will see everyone next time.